The klaxons pierced through Nixari's unconsciousness like quantum needles through subatomic fabric. She jolted awake, her quaternary heart hammering against her chest cavity. The emergency lighting bathed her quarters in a crimson glow that made the normally pristine white walls of the celestial wayfarer look like they were bleeding. "Status report!" she croaked, her vocal membranes dry from cryosleep. The ship's AI remained silent. That was impossible. The Wayfarer's intelligence matrix was hardwired to respond to any crew member's query, especially during emergency protocols. Something was catastrophically wrong. Nixari stumbled from her pod, her atrophied muscles struggling against the ship's artificial gravity. The door to her quarters slid open with a reluctant hiss, revealing the corridor beyond, dark save for the same pulsing red emergency lights that illuminated her room. "Hello?" she called out. "Captain Voros? Lieutenant Ashana?" Only the echo of her own voice answered. The navigation deck was 3 levels up. Nixari dragged herself to the nearest lift, but the control panel remained dead despite her repeated attempts to activate it. With a grimace, she pried open the emergency access panel and began the arduous climb. By the time she reached the navigation deck, her limbs were trembling with exertion. The massive reinforced viewport that dominated the forward bulkhead revealed the reason for the ship's distress. Instead of the hyperlane transit corridor that should have surrounded them, the Wayfarer drifted in unfamiliar space. A massive red giant star loomed in the distance, its baleful light casting long shadows across the deck. "We're off course," she muttered to herself. "By several parsecs at least." A noise behind her, a soft scraping, made her spin around. A figure hunched over the navigation console, humanoid but unfamiliar. "Identify yourself," Nixari commanded, reaching for the stun baton that wasn't there. The figure straightened slowly, turning to face her. It was bipedal, with a curiously flat face and pinkish-brown skin that looked alarmingly fragile. No scales, no protective chitin, not even proper camouflage pigmentation. Just a thin covering of fabric over vulnerable flesh. A human, Nixari had only seen them in xenobiology archives. Their homeworld was still classified as a developing system, technically under non-interference protocols. What was one doing here, light years from their territorial boundaries? "Engineer Kyrillos Mendahi," the human said, showing surprisingly sharp teeth in what Nixari hoped was a non-aggressive display. "I'd say at your service, but honestly, we're all pretty screwed right now." "How did you get aboard this vessel? This is a Galactic Coalition research ship." "Humans aren't." "Coalition picked me up 6 months ago from a mining outpost in the Venturi Belt," Kyrillos interrupted. "I'm a specialist in quantum jump drives. They needed me to help stabilize the experimental drive on this ship." The human's face contorted in what might have been frustration. "Fat lot of good that did us." "Where is the rest of the crew?" Nixari demanded, still in cryo-sleep. "The system's selective revival protocol only woke us 2, the navigational officer and the engineer. Makes sense in an emergency." "And Captain Voros?" The human's expression shifted, those strangely mobile facial features conveying something Nixari couldn't quite interpret. "Dead, along with half the command staff. The hyperdrive malfunction caused a cascading failure in the primary life support grid for the command level." Nixari sank into the nearest chair, her exoskeleton clicking against the metal seat. "So we're stranded," she said flatly. "Oh, it gets better," Kyrillos replied, gesturing to the console readout. "We're not just stranded. We're in uncharted space, the AI is non-responsive, and we've got about 14 days of life support left." The human paused. "Unless we can restart the drive core." Nixari's head snapped up. "That's impossible without a full engineering team and a space dock." For the first time, the human's mouth curved upward. Maybe for a coalition crew. But us humans? We specialize in impossible. "You want to do what?" Nixari stared at Kyrillos, her secondary eyelids flickering rapidly in disbelief. The human had spent the last 6 hours crawling through maintenance ducts, rerouting power systems, and cursing in a language Nixari's translator couldn't decipher. Now, standing before the ship's massive reactor core chamber, covered in coolant fluid and grinning like a madman, Kirillos had proposed something that would make even the most reckless Verosian shock trooper hesitate. Manual recalibration of the quantum fold inhibitors, Kirillos repeated, as if it were the most reasonable suggestion in the universe. The automated systems are locked out, but there's an auxiliary manual override, used for emergencies. That chamber is flooded with theta radiation, Nixari protested. Even with protective gear, you'd have less than 2 minutes before cellular degradation begins. 1 minute and 43 seconds, according to my calculations. Kirillos pulled a battered datapad from a pocket. Just enough time to reset the primary and secondary junctions. Nixari's mandibles clicked in agitation. And if you're wrong, then I die horribly, and you're in exactly the same position you were 5 minutes ago, the human said with that strange upward curve of the lips that Nixari was beginning to recognize as a smile. But if I'm right, we might just get the drive online enough for a short jump to a system where we can effect repairs. This is our only option, Kirillos finished for her. Look, we've got 246 crew members in cryo-sleep. If we don't get main power back online in the next 72 hours, the backup generators for the cryopods will fail. Everyone dies. Nixari stared at the human. Such a fragile-looking species, with no natural defenses to speak of. Yet here was Kirillos, volunteering to walk into what amounted to a radiation death trap on the slim chance it might save the crew. Why? She asked finally. Why risk yourself for a coalition vessel? We're not even part of your Terran alliance. Something flickered across Kirillos's face, an expression Nixari couldn't interpret. Because I can, the human said simply. Because someone has to. Because sitting around waiting to die isn't an option where I come from. Before Nixari could respond, the ship lurched violently, throwing them both against the bulkhead. The red emergency lights flickered, then dimmed further. That's the stabilization thrusters failing, Kirillos said grimly, checking a readout on the wall. We're being pulled into the gravity well of that red giant. Radiation levels in the core are about to get a lot worse as the shields deteriorate. Nixari made a quick calculation. How much time do we have? Before we're too close to escape? Maybe 8 hours. 8 hours. Not enough time to wake the rest of the engineering team, even if they had the power to do so. Not enough time to devise a proper plan. I'll assist you, Nixari said finally. My species has better radiation tolerance than yours. Perhaps together we can— No offense, but you'd just slow me down, Kirillos interrupted, already pulling on a specialized radiation suit from an emergency locker. I need you on the bridge, ready to redirect power the moment I get the inhibitors reset. Nixari wanted to argue, but the human was right. She needed to be at the controls, ready to channel whatever power they could salvage into shields and propulsion. Very well, she conceded. But remember, 1 minute and 43 seconds, not a second longer. Kirillos sealed the helmet of the radiation suit with a soft hiss. Time me, the human said, voice slightly muffled. Then, more softly, if this works, you might want to reconsider those non-interference protocols your coalition has regarding Earth. As Kirillos disappeared through the airlock into the reactor core, Nixari couldn't help but think that perhaps the Galactic Coalition had seriously underestimated these humans. The chronometer on Nixari's wrist device ticked inexorably forward. 1 minute and 20 seconds since Kirillos had entered the reactor core. Through the reinforced observation window, she could see the human moving with surprising precision, hands steady despite the lethal radiation saturating the chamber. Nixari had positioned herself at the auxiliary control panel as instructed, ready to redirect power the moment the inhibitors were reset. Status? She called through the communication link. Primary junction recalibrated, came Kirillos's strained voice. Moving to secondary. The radiation's stronger than I calculated. Nixari checked her readings. Theta radiation spiking. You have 40 seconds before critical exposure. Plenty of time, Kyrillos replied. But Nixari detected the tremor in the human's voice. The ship shuddered again, more violently this time. A structural support beam groaned overhead, the metal visibly warping as the gravitational forces intensified. The celestial wayfarer was being pulled apart. 30 seconds, Kyrillos. Inside the chamber, the human had reached the secondary junction panel. But instead of the quick reset procedure they had discussed, Kyrillos seemed to be struggling with the mechanism. The locking bolt is fused, the human reported, voice tight with effort. Radiation damage. I need to break it free, manually. You don't have time, Nixari insisted. Exit the chamber now. Not an option. To Nixari's horror, Kyrillos removed the protective glove from one hand. Direct exposure would accelerate cellular damage exponentially, but the human needed the dexterity that the bulky radiation suit couldn't provide. 20 seconds until critical exposure. Kyrillos didn't respond, focused entirely on manipulating the delicate components with rapidly blistering fingers. Nixari watched, mandibles clenched tight as the human's exposed skin reddened, then began to blacken. 10 seconds! With a cry of pain that crackled through the comm link, Kyrillos wrenched the bolt free. The secondary junction hummed to life, lights flickering on across the panel. It's done, the human gasped. Redirect. Power! Now! Nixari's fingers flew across the control panel, executing the sequence they had prepared. For a terrible moment, nothing happened. Then the ship's lights flickered, dimmed, and blazed to full power. The constant wail of the emergency klaxons ceased abruptly, replaced by the reassuring hum of the drive core coming online. You did it, Nixari breathed. Kyrillos, you did it. Now get out of there. No response. Through the observation window, she could see the human slumped against the junction panel, motionless. Nixari didn't hesitate. Overriding the safety protocols, she forced the airlock open and rushed into the chamber, ignoring the radiation warnings blaring from her wrist device. She reached Kyrillos in seconds, hefting the surprisingly light human over her shoulder and staggering back toward the airlock. By the time they reached the decontamination chamber, Nixari's own skin was beginning to tingle uncomfortably. The first sign of radiation sickness in her species. But it was Kyrillos who worried her more. The human lay unconscious, breath coming in shallow gasps, the exposed hand a nightmarish tableau of radiation burns. Medical emergency in reactor section 4. Nixari called out, hoping the ship's communications had been restored along with main power. Human crew member with severe radiation exposure. To her relief, the ship's AI finally responded. Medical response team dispatched. Life support systems restored to critical areas. Drive core at 40% capacity. 40%. Not enough for a proper jump, but perhaps enough to escape the red giant's gravitational pull and reach a stable orbit somewhere in this system. As the decontamination protocols engaged, Nixari gently removed Kyrillos' helmet. The human's face was pale, a sheen of sweat glistening on the smooth skin. Those strange, expressive eyes flickered open, focusing with difficulty on Nixari. Did it work? Kyrillos whispered. Yes. The drive core is online. A weak smile. Told? You... Humans specialize in impossible. You exceeded critical exposure by 28 seconds, Nixari said, unable to keep the accusation from her voice. Why didn't you leave when I told you to? Kyrillos' eyes drifted closed again. Job wasn't finished. As the medical team arrived and took charge of the injured human, Nixari found herself wondering once again about these peculiar beings, so physically vulnerable, yet possessed of a determination that bordered on madness. Perhaps, she thought, as She made her way back to the bridge to plot their escape trajectory. The Coalition's assessment of humanity needed serious reconsideration. 3 days later, Nixari stood at Kirillos's bedside in the medical bay, watching the steady rise and fall of the human's chest beneath the regeneration field. The ship's medical AI had done everything possible, but the prognosis remained uncertain. Humans, it seemed, were simultaneously more fragile and more resilient than Coalition medical databases suggested. Quaternary cellular degradation has been halted, Medical Officer Eshtavi reported, her translucent fingers adjusting the settings on the biomonitor. Eshtavi's species, the Lumini, had been awakened from cryosleep specifically for their unparalleled medical expertise. But the damage to the peripheral nervous system is extensive. We've never treated radiation poisoning in a human before. Will Kirillos recover? Nixari asked. Eshtavi's luminescent skin pulsed with uncertainty. Perhaps. But even if survival is achieved, there may be permanent damage to the extremities. The human would lose that hand at minimum, all because Kirillos had removed a glove to save a ship full of aliens who, until recently, hadn't even acknowledged humanity as equals. Leaving the medical bay, Nixari made her way to the bridge. Thanks to Kirillos's sacrifice, they had managed to escape the Red Giant's gravity well and establish orbit around a small, rocky planetoid at the system's edge. The ship's AI was functioning again, and Nixari had been able to awaken essential crew members from cryosleep. Captain Merezi, who had assumed command after Captain Voros's death, looked up as Nixari entered. A veteran of 3 deep space expeditions, Merezi had the characteristic silver scales of Aldebaran aristocracy and the stern demeanor to match. "Navigation officer," Merezi acknowledged. "How is the human?" "Stable, but critical," Nixari replied. "Eshtavi is doing everything possible." Merezi nodded absently, attention already returning to the star charts displayed on the main screen. "We've identified our position. We're approximately 18,000 light-years from Coalition space, in an uncharted sector beyond the Perseus Void." Nixari's exoskeleton tightened instinctively. The Perseus Void was considered the absolute boundary of explored space. Nothing beyond it had ever been charted. How is that possible? Even with a catastrophic drive malfunction, we couldn't have jumped that far. "That's what we need to discuss," Merezi said, voice lowering. "The drive didn't malfunction. It was deliberately sabotaged." Nixari stared at the captain. "Sabotage? By whom?" "We don't know yet, but what's more concerning is that before losing consciousness, your human friend activated a subroutine in the A ship systems that I've never seen before. Some kind of emergency protocol that wasn't part of the original programming." "That's impossible," Nixari protested. "Kirillos was only restoring power to the drive core. See for yourself," Merezi said, bringing up a log of system activations on a nearby console. At precisely the moment the inhibitors were reset, this protocol was executed. Nixari studied the code scrolling across the screen, her confusion growing. The protocol had indeed been activated at the exact moment Kirillos had reset the secondary junction, but the code structure was unlike anything in Coalition programming. It was elegant in its complexity, yet fundamentally alien in design. "What does it do?" she asked finally. "We're not entirely sure yet," Merezi admitted, "but it appears to have established some kind of quantum link. Our communications officer detected a signal burst immediately after activation, directed toward Earth." Nixari felt a cold weight settle in her thoracic cavity. "You think Kirillos is a spy? That saving the ship was just a cover for sending a message home?" "I think," Merezi said carefully, "that there is much more to humans than the Coalition has acknowledged. And I think your engineer Mendahi knows far more about our experimental drive technology than should be possible for a species supposedly new to interstellar travel." Before Nixari could respond, the ship's AI interrupted. "Captain, We're detecting an energy signature at the edge of the system. Quantum signature matches nothing in our database. Morezi and Nixari rushed to the viewport. In the distance, a pinpoint of blue light had appeared, growing rapidly larger as they watched. "Is it a ship?" Morezi demanded. "Unknown," the AI responded. "But it's on an intercept course. Estimated contact in 17 minutes. 17 minutes to prepare for a possible encounter with an unknown entity beyond the edge of charted space, with a damaged ship and half the crew still in cryo-sleep. And somewhere in the medical bay, an unconscious human whose actions suddenly seemed much more calculated than Nixari had initially believed." The blue light grew, resolving into a vessel unlike any Nixari had ever seen. Where coalition ships favored geometric precision, this craft seemed almost organic in design, a sinuous, elongated form that shimmered with an inner luminescence. It was massive, dwarfing the celestial wayfarer by at least 5 times. "Scanning. Technology not recognized," reported Lieutenant Zovari from the sensor station. "Hull composition unknown. Energy signatures, inconsistent with known propulsion systems." Captain Morezi's scales had darkened to a deep indigo, a sign of extreme stress in her species. "Tactical assessment? If hostile, we wouldn't stand a chance," Zovari replied bluntly. "Our weapon systems are still offline and shields are at minimal capacity." "It's not hostile," came a weak voice from the bridge entrance. Nixari turned to see Kyrillos leaning heavily against the doorframe. The human looked ghastly, skin ashen, the injured hand wrapped in regenerative bandages, eyes sunken but alert. Eshtavi hovered anxiously behind, clearly having failed to keep her patient confined to the medical bay. "You should be resting," Nixari said, moving to support the human before Kyrillos could collapse. "No time," Kyrillos murmured, allowing Nixari to guide him to a seat. "They're here." "They?" Morezi demanded, crossing to stand before the human. "You know what that ship is?" "It's not exactly a ship," Kyrillos replied. "At least not by your definition." "Explain." "Now." Morezi's tone left no room for evasion. Kyrillos sighed, then winced at the apparent pain the simple action caused. "The quantum drive on this vessel isn't coalition technology. It's human." A stunned silence fell across the bridge. Nixari felt as though the artificial gravity had suddenly increased tenfold. "Impossible," Morezi finally said. "Humanity has barely achieved efficient interplanetary travel. You lack the scientific foundation for quantum fold technology." "That's what we wanted you to believe," Kyrillos said quietly. "The truth is, we developed practical quantum entanglement drive systems 60 years ago. We've been watching the coalition for decades." "The non-interference protocols," Nixari realized. "They weren't to protect humanity from us. They were to protect you from us," Kyrillos finished. "Or rather, to give us time to evaluate whether the coalition posed a threat to Earth." Morezi's scales rippled with barely contained fury. "You infiltrated a coalition research vessel under false pretenses." "I was invited aboard," Kyrillos corrected. "Everything I told you was true. I am a specialist in quantum jump drives. I was at that mining outpost. The coalition did recruit me for my expertise. I just omitted certain details about where that expertise came from." "The sabotage," Nixari said. "You caused the drive malfunction." Kyrillos shook his head. "No, that was genuine. Someone else aboard this ship deliberately destabilized the drive matrix, someone who suspected what the quantum core really was and wanted to prevent it from falling into coalition hands." "Which is what, exactly?" Morezi demanded. Before Kyrillos could answer, the bridge view screen activated spontaneously. The face that appeared belonged to no species Nixari recognized, humanoid, but with features that seemed to shift subtly as if the visual interface couldn't quite resolve them properly. "Kyrillos Mendahi," the being said, voice resonant yet strangely textured. "You have activated the emergency protocol. Is the asset secure?" "Damaged but intact," Kyrillos replied. The coalition officers present are Captain Marazi and Navigation. Officer Nixari. They know. The being's gaze seemed to intensify, focusing on the coalition officers. I am Admiral Ilara Voss, Terran Oversight Command. Your vessel contains classified human technology that must be recovered. Marazi bristled visibly. This is a coalition research ship on a sanctioned mission. You have no authority here. Your mission, Admiral Voss said calmly, was built on a fundamental deception. The quantum drive core you've been researching is actually a prototype displacement engine designed by our Advanced Physics Division. It was stolen from a secure facility 3 years ago. We've been tracking it ever since. That's absurd, Marazi retorted. This drive was developed by coalition scientists at the Rigel Institute. The scientists at the Rigel Institute, Kyrillos interjected, were experimenting with technology they barely understood, technology that was deliberately leaked to them through controlled channels. Nixari looked between the human on the bridge and the one on the view screen, a creeping realization dawning. You used us as test subjects, she said softly. You wanted to see what we would do with the technology. Admiral Voss didn't deny it. We needed to understand the coalition's intentions, whether you would weaponize it. And now? Marazi asked, voice dangerous. Now we reclaim what's ours, Voss replied. Your crew will not be harmed. We will transport you to the nearest coalition outpost after the core is removed. The massive ship outside had drawn closer, its hull now visibly rippling with patterns of energy that seemed almost sentient in their complexity. And if we refuse? Marazi challenged. For the first time, Admiral Voss showed something like regret. Captain, please understand your position. That vessel approaching you isn't merely a ship. It's a physical manifestation of folded space-time. What you might call a dimensional interface. We don't wish to demonstrate its capabilities. The implied threat hung in the air. Nixari glanced at Kyrillos, who met her gaze with evident weariness. For what it's worth, the human said quietly, I argued against this approach. I believe direct contact would be better than subterfuge. Not exactly a comfort at the moment, Nixari replied. As if in response to her words, the ship trembled. Outside, the alien vessel had extended what appeared to be tendrils of pure energy, reaching toward the celestial wayfarer with inexorable purpose. The energy tendrils enveloped the celestial wayfarer in a cocoon of shimmering blue light. The bridge consoles flickered and died, then reactivated with displays showing unfamiliar symbols. We've lost control of all systems, Lieutenant Zavari reported, fingers dancing uselessly across his now unresponsive station. They've completely overridden our technology. Captain Marazi stood rigidly at the center of the bridge, dignity intact despite their utter helplessness. It seems negotiations are no longer an option, she said coldly. Admiral Voss's image still dominated the view screen. This isn't an invasion, Captain. It's a repossession of dangerous technology that your people aren't ready for. And who decides when we're ready? Nixari asked, unable to contain her frustration. What gives humanity the right to judge an entire coalition of species? Experience, Kyrillos said softly from his seat. The human looked even worse now, skin glistening with fever, but those peculiar eyes remained intensely clear. We nearly destroyed ourselves 3 times before we learned to manage quantum displacement technology safely. The energy ripples it, creates across dimensional boundaries. They attract attention. Attention from what? Nixari asked. Admiral Voss and Kyrillos exchanged a look through the view screen, a moment of shared understanding that excluded everyone else on the bridge. There are things between the stars that are best left undisturbed, Voss said finally. Entities that exist in the spaces between dimensions. We call them the Veil. Your scientists were dangerously close to tearing a hole straight through to their realm. An involuntary shudder ran through Nixari's exoskeleton. Coalition exploratory vessels had occasionally returned with inexplicable data, or not returned at all. There were regions of space that ships avoided by unspoken agreement, places where sensors malfunctioned, and crew members reported disturbing dreams. "You could have simply warned us," Merezi said, but some of the anger had left her voice. "Would you have believed us?" Kirillos asked. "A species you considered primitive, claiming knowledge of interdimensional beings? Or would you have assumed we were attempting to hinder coalition technological advancement for our own benefit?" Merezi didn't answer, which was answer enough. The ship shuddered again, more violently this time. "What's happening?" Nixari demanded. "We're removing the core," Admiral Voss explained. "The process is delicate." On the view screen, alarms suddenly blared in Voss's background. The Admiral turned away, conferring urgently with someone off-screen. When she faced them again, her expression had hardened. "There's a problem. The sabotage to your drive system was more extensive than we realized. The quantum matrix is destabilizing. If it collapses entirely—" "The veil," Kirillos whispered. "It would create a tear." "Precisely," Voss confirmed. "We're attempting to contain it, but the entanglement patterns are deeply embedded in your ship's systems. Engineer Mendahi, we need your direct interface. Your neural implant is still synced to the core's primary architecture." Nixari turned to Kirillos in shock. "Neural implant?" The human gave a pained smile. "Standard equipment for quantum engineers. It's how I was able to reset the inhibitors so precisely." "You didn't tell me." "Classified technology," Kirillos replied simply. "Just like everything else about this mission." The human struggled to stand. "I'll need direct access to the core chamber." "Impossible," Eshtavi interjected, speaking for the first time since following Kirillos to the bridge. "Your condition is critical. Further radiation exposure would be fatal." "If that core collapses," Kirillos countered, "we all die anyway, along with possibly everything in this star system." A tense silence fell across the bridge. Finally, Captain Merezi spoke. "What do you need from us?" "Access to the core chamber," Kirillos said, "and someone to help me get there. I don't think I can walk that far on my own." Nixari stepped forward without hesitation. "I'll take you." The journey to the reactor section was painfully slow. Kirillos leaned heavily against Nixari, each step clearly agonizing. By the time they reached the core chamber entrance, the human's breathing had become shallow and labored. "You need to leave once I'm inside," Kirillos instructed, voice barely above a whisper. "The radiation levels will spike when I initiate the containment sequence." "I'm not leaving you again," Nixari said firmly. Kirillos managed a weak laugh. "Stubborn. I'm starting to think that's a universal trait among sentient species." The human's expression sobered. "Nixari, what I'm about to do, It will establish a direct neural link between my implant and the core. I'll essentially become part of the quantum matrix." Understanding dawned. "You won't be coming back out." "No. There must be another way. Your Admiral Voss is doing everything possible from her end, but the sabotage created quantum entanglement patterns unique to this specific moment in space-time. Only someone already connected to the system can disentangle them." The ship shuddered more violently, the lights flickering. Whatever was happening, it was accelerating. "Why?" Nixari asked, the question that had been haunting her since the beginning. "Why risk yourself for us? First in the radiation chamber, now this?" Kirillos's gaze met hers steadily. "Because that's what humans do. We protect what's worth protecting, especially when, it's not just about us." Before Nixari could respond, Kirillos pushed away from her support and stumbled through the chamber entrance. The door sealed automatically behind the human. Through the observation window, Nixari watched as Kirillos approached the quantum core. a swirling vortex of energy that pulsed with increasing instability, arcs of pale fire lashing out against. The containment field. Kyrillos placed both hands against the core housing, the healthy one and the radiation-damaged one. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the human's body went rigid, head thrown back, as tendrils of energy flowed up from the core and into Kyrillos' form. The comms system in Nixari's wrist device crackled to life. "Connection established," came Admiral Voss's voice. "Engineer Mendahi is initiating containment protocols." On the bridge, Captain Merezi watched the view screen with a mixture of awe and horror as the human vessel, the dimensional interface, as they had called it, seemed to fold in upon itself, creating patterns of light and geometry that defied comprehension. "What's happening?" she demanded. "Your engineer is using the neural link to recalibrate the quantum matrix," Voss explained, essentially becoming a human buffer between dimensions. "It's not a procedure with a high survival rate." In the core chamber, Kyrillos had become the center of a storm of quantum energy. The human's body was now barely visible within the maelstrom of light and mathematical possibility made manifest. Nixari pressed her hand against the observation window, feeling utterly helpless. "Kyrillos." Suddenly, the ship's AI spoke, its voice altered somehow, infused with a familiar cadence. "Quantum collapse averted," it said, using Kyrillos' voice patterns. "Matrix stabilized. Sorry about the deception, Nixari. Sometimes we have to become the impossible to achieve it." The storm of energy in the core chamber imploded with a silent flash, collapsing inward until nothing remained but the steady glow of a properly functioning reactor core. Of Kyrillos Mendahi, there was no sign. On the view screen, Admiral Voss bowed her head briefly. When she looked up, her expression was solemn but composed. "Engineer Mendahi's sacrifice has prevented a catastrophic breach. We honor their service." She paused. "Captain Merezi, Navigation Officer Nixari, the Coalition has been kept ignorant of certain realities for your own protection. That time is ending. We would like to formally open diplomatic relations." Merezi and Nixari exchanged glances. "I believe," Merezi said carefully, "that the Coalition Council will have many questions." "As they should," Voss acknowledged. "But perhaps we can begin with understanding rather than suspicion. Engineer Mendahi believed our species could learn from each other. As the human vessel prepared to escort the celestial wayfarer back to Coalition space, Nixari returned to the core chamber one last time. The quantum core pulsed with a steady blue light, stable now, but somehow different than before, as if infused with a consciousness that hadn't been present previously. She placed her hand against the housing, feeling the gentle warmth radiating through the protective barrier. "You said humans specialize in the impossible," she said softly. "I think I understand now." The core pulsed once, slightly brighter, before returning to its steady rhythm. Somewhere within that intricate quantum lattice, Nixari was certain, Kyrillos Mendahi lived on, transformed but not gone, humanity's first ambassador to the spaces between dimensions. As the celestial wayfarer turned toward home, escorted by the enigmatic vessel of a civilization far more advanced than they had imagined, Nixari felt something she hadn't experienced since awakening to those blaring klaxons days earlier. Hope. Hope that the universe was larger, stranger, and more wondrous than even the Coalition had dreamed. Hope that humanity, with all its reckless courage, its impossible determination, and its willingness to sacrifice, would be not a threat, but an ally against the darkness between stars. In the quantum core, something pulsed in rhythm like a human heart, a silent promise that some boundaries were meant to be crossed, and some impossibilities were meant to be embraced. The impossible, after all, was what humans did best.